New at 6, strong support for a high-profile gun bill that's moving through the Capitol. The legislation is nicknamed the Suzanne O bill after the Maui police officer who was shot and killed last year. Arlene Kawano was there as some of top law enforcement leaders showed up to testify.
All four Hawaii police chiefs, along with the brother of Officer Suzanne O, testified, urging lawmakers to advance the bill.
Aloha and talofa. My name is Shin O. I am the brother of Officer Suzanne O.
Emotional testimony at a House Judiciary Committee hearing last week.
Officer Suzanne O served her community with courage, integrity, and an unwavering commitment to protect others.
Supporters of Bill 2575, nicknamed the Suzanne O bill, urge lawmakers to push through the legislation that includes mandatory minimum sentences for a convicted felon who uses a gun to commit another crime, similar to federal guidelines. MPD officer Suzanne O died last August while responding to a terroristic threatening call. Her alleged killer, a convict who prosecutors say had drugs on him and had been served a TRO, is charged with first-degree murder, attempted murder, and firearms crimes.
If it can give one family more time with their loved one, then Suzanne's legacy continues in a powerful way.
This bill is not about punishment alone. It is about deterrence, justice, and a reaffirmation of our collective values.
MPD Chief John Pelletier flew into Honolulu for the hearing, along with Hawaii County Police Chief Reed Mahuna, who also shared a similar story about the murder of Officer Bronson Kaliloa in 2018.
How many times in Hawaii and across the country, someone who should have never had a gun in the first place ends up with one, and someone doesn't go home?
The police chiefs of Honolulu and Kauai, the union, Department of Law Enforcement leaders, and citizens also testified in support.
When people are able to be released, it's not that people don't want to see them do well if they can be rehabilitated. But it's a thing if it's a certain type of trauma when victims' families have to know that their murderers of their family members are in the general public.
The Office of the Public Defender was the only agency that testified in opposition, saying there are already strict gun laws for felons.
The language in this measure that says no possibility of parole, it takes away any discretion from the paroling authority to decide whether that person has been reasonably and meaningfully rehabilitated.
Committee Chair Representative David Tarnas did not want the bill to advance in its original form. He added amendments that removed the mandatory prison term.
Personally, I want to maintain judicial discretion, but I will acknowledge that there is strong support for increasing penalties.
I liked the bill originally, and I disagree with your amendments.
Despite the disagreement, the committee voted to advance the bill, saying further discussion is ahead.
The bill already passed the Senate. It is next heading to the House Finance Committee. I'm Lynn Kawano, Hawaii News Now.